The weather is very consistent. It's a consistent 80, low 80s with high humidity. It's actually just about the same distance below the equator as Hawaii is above the equator, and then almost directly below it. So the weather is very similar in that way, because the islands are, basically just opposite seasons, although there's really very few seasons, kind of hotter and not as hot, and rainy and not as rainy. So the weather is very consistent that way. I remember riding my bike, and during certain times of the year, and almost all the time, just expecting that, a couple times a week I'm going to be riding my bike dripping wet because it's going to rain, and it's just going to rain for 15-20 minutes, and it's going to downpour, and then it'll be clouds will be gone, and it'll be sunny, and you'll dry out pretty quick. But the weather is very nice and mild, besides the rain, which is pretty common for a Pacific island. But their living conditions in Tahiti, Tahiti is because it's so heavily influenced by France, there are a lot of opportunities for Tahitians to have a lot of nice things that wouldn't be afforded to them without the French government subsidizing and providing opportunities, as far as education and things like that. And so I think it is very similar to most Polynesian cultures where, and in talking with friends who went to Central and South America, they said, we found a lot of similarities in just living conditions and kind of how people live. And also I think a lot of it has to do with the climate, where houses are very open. The windows are always open, doors are always open. Rarely are, the doors, if the doors are closed and the windows are closed, that people are gone from that house for an extended period of time, not just for the day. And so it's houses are open. There's not, like real secure windows. There's a lot of louver windows, that flip back and forth. And housing conditions are pretty good. They have a lot of houses that they call Whare MTR, which is, I'm not even sure what the MTR stands for, but it's basically a kind of a house they all look the same. They're made out of wood up on stilts, and all of the materials are provided. It's like a kit that you order, and I believe they're subsidized from the government, and so you can get a house that way. A lot of the other houses are cinder block walls, ceramic tile floors, usually an open patio where people do most of their eating and often their cooking outside on the patio. But yeah, living conditions are definitely not like they are here in the United States or here in Utah, but it's not necessarily because they don't have the means. It's often just the way of life. One thing that's very common is for there to not be a toilet seat, which is, I'm just thinking about things that I remember as I was first going there that kind of shocked me, and then as I've taken my wife back, things that she's mentioned and commented on, or like not in missionary homes, but in other people's homes, like not having a bathroom door, just having basically a curtain in front of the bathroom, and and then not having a toilet seat where it's just like they've taken the whole toilet seat off, so you just sit on the toilet, and not a lot of hot water, but the water is naturally warmer. So I took a lot of cold showers on my mission, which I think has changed a lot since I've been there. I think there are a lot more water heaters in mission homes. Rarely do you see air conditioning. Things that kind of shocked me that weren't there, that I think there are more now, but like microwaves. Microwaves are almost non-existent. So there's a lot of things that are different than here, but like I said, it's not necessarily that they don't have the means, it's just a different way of living, and you just kind of get used to it. But that are definitely take an adjustment from, at least from me. Maybe I was just kind of a spoiled American growing up here with, lots of things that really, once you've lived otherwise, you realize are unnecessary. A lot of extra frills to the house and to life, and like extra decorations and things like that around the house that just seem unnecessary because it's a very simple way of life. Everyone lives a very simple life down there. A lot of people will, and it really depends on where where you are as well. My time on Tahiti was very different from my time out on Apataki or Arutua, small Tuamotus, where out in Tuamotus, like I said, there were only about 300 people there. There was only 1 or 2 cars on the whole island, and everyone just kind of shared the car. Like literally everyone would just borrow the car from somebody. And people there would just either work in the pearl farm or they would just fish. And they'd go out and fish, and then they'd kind of sell their fish and just make enough money doing something to buy the things that they can't get there. So they can get a lot of things from the land. They eat a lot of fish, but then they'll buy rice and just very simple things that they need, rice and soy sauce and salt and things that you can't get from the land. The rest of it, breadfruit, fish, things that they can grow, they'll just grow and eat that and kind of live off of the land. And so Tahiti is really nice that way. People always say you could survive in Tahiti off the land. You don't need a job in Tahiti because you can find everything you need. Fruit trees just grow naturally, and coconut trees all over the place, and there's fish, and things just grow well. Pineapple there, some of the best pineapple in the world. And so a lot of people do just live off the land, just get a job to just kind of get by. Although I think it is changing a lot more younger people are going to school, getting education, getting more regimented jobs and careers, whereas the older generation is more farming and kind of agriculture, construction type things, type of jobs. So there's a good variety. Closer you are to Papeete, the more it is like America, the more it is like what we would call a first world country. The further away, the more I guess you could say it's more like a third world country. So there's a lot of variety in that aspect, depending on where you serve. Transportation system in Tahiti, they have a bus system that is completely awful. In fact, it's funny, I have been back a couple times with my wife, and as I go back as a tourist and I talk to people about tourism and I talk to the hotels and things, they'll even tell you don't rely on the bus system because you just never know when the bus is going to come, when it's really operating. So transportation in there, as a missionary, there are quite a few vehicles, but then also a lot of bicycle. And, you ride your bike a lot in a lot of areas. For people visiting Tahiti, the only reliable way to get around is to rent a car or to know somebody that can let you have a car, borrow a car. The island takes about 2 hours to drive around the whole island of Tahiti, so it's pretty small. In fact, the whole island of Tahiti would fit inside the Great Salt Lake, and that's the biggest landmass there. So it's very small. It doesn't seem like you would need much transportation, but it does take quite a bit to get places, and the only road is around the outside of the island. So even though you may look on a map and say, oh, we're not very far from Papeete to Papara, it's still a good 1.5-hour drive. So you really do need a vehicle. A lot of tourism in Tahiti, but not as much as say Hawaii. It's a lot more expensive to get there, and it's also not as touristy, where it's much more, I guess, there's not as many things for tourists to do that are geared towards tourists. Although, some of the islands like Bora Bora and Moorea are some of the most, visited and, highest priced places to visit as a tourist, because the islands themselves are so naturally beautiful. So a lot of the things that tourists do are in the water, snorkeling, scuba diving, visiting the beach and just spending time outside. There are quite a few hikes to go on in Tahiti. So there are a lot of things in that regard. But like I said, not a lot of people in Tahiti speak English. And so I had some friends that went and visited Tahiti on a separate vacation, and they mentioned to me, they said, we've traveled all over the world, and Tahiti was one of the hardest places to communicate because very few people spoke fluent English, which seems weird to when everyone speaks French and you go to France and almost everyone speaks English. In Tahiti, they they don't need to. You know, they don't have a lot of tourists. They don't have a lot. They're not connected to. It's not like Europe where, you know, they're connected to a lot of other nations and do a lot of international business and a lot of communication. Although, like I said, everything is very much changing. For example, while I was there, it was very difficult to find places with the internet. And since I've gone back, the internet is everywhere, you know. And as I've been online, and friends and, you know, past you know, investigators connect with me on Facebook and are on Facebook constantly, you can tell that the internet has spread. And so a lot of that international communication has spread, and a lot more of the younger people are learning English and speaking English just because of the internet and that international connection. So